Let me introduce our speakers, and we really are happy to have them. And Ken Jimbo, who is in Tokyo and is a hero of socialist labor, because I'm guessing it's about 2 in the morning there or something on that order. And so Ken and the others who are making his appearance possible here, we're very grateful. Ken is an associate professor at the Faculty of Policy Management at Keio University. I won't read his bio, you have it, but he really is an outstanding commentator on both Japanese security policy, but also on international nuclear policy and the question and challenge of deterrence, of nuclear deterrence, going forward, especially in Northeast Asia. So we're really delighted to have Ken with us, and very appreciative, Ken, of your staying up. And he'll talk about a bunch of elements in terms of Japanese perceptions of the NPR, but one of the things I imagine he'll address that's important is that the NPR does record that the U.S. will remove from service a sea-based cruise missile that had been retained basically as the way to manifest a special extended nuclear deterrent to Japan. And so the NPR does remove that without lessening the commitment to Japan, I would argue. Then moving around the world in terms of, I don't know if it's counterclockwise, but I'm thinking in terms of clocks, to Poland. We have Łukasz Kulesa with us from Warsaw. He's he's in Warsaw and not here because of the airline difficulties. We're very glad to have him. He will be with us by phone. Łukasz is an international security analyst and deputy head of the research office at the Polish Institute of International Affairs in Warsaw. This is a really important think tank in Europe. They do very good work. And Łukasz, as you will hear, is a really trenchant analyst of security policy and security challenges in Central Europe especially. So we're delighted to have him. And then last but not least, and in person, we have Odinga Fallheim, who is a minister counselor for political affairs at the Royal Norwegian Embassy in the United States. We've dealt a fair amount, and he's an absolutely first-rate diplomat. And it's very important, we felt, to have a Norwegian perspective here, because Norway's in a very interesting position in NATO, and as both a party to extended nuclear deterrence as well as conventional deterrence, but also as a leading advocate of nuclear disarmament. And so the Norwegian foreign minister is one of 5 foreign ministers who wrote a letter to the NATO Secretary General not long ago, urging more fulsome debate in NATO over the agenda of how to reconcile nuclear disarmament, arms control, and nonproliferation with the requirements of deterrence. And that this is a major initiative of Norway along with other states. It's not an intellectually or policy simple thing to do, and so it'll be very, I think, important to hear, to discuss that here. So Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we'll go straight to Łukasz, and welcome, and again, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you so much, George, for your kind introduction, and I hope that the audio is okay for everybody. My name is Ken Jimbo. I'm an associate professor at the Keio University in Japan. It is great to have this very unique opportunity to talk on the Japanese perspective on the nuclear posture review via video conference. And as you can see in the screen, I'm talking from my private home working room in Tokyo, and it is midnight 2:30 a.m. and we are living in the opposite side of the world, and it is also a great occasion to know that the world is not physically flat. And despite all the globalization and cutting-edge technology bring us much closer. Let me have my brief analysis on the NPR, especially with regard to the extended deterrence implication on Japan. The NPR tries to achieve many objectives to reduce the nuclear risk in the world, with de-emphasizing the role of nuclear weapons in the US security strategy. But however, maintaining the effective nuclear extended deterrence in Northeast Asia under the new NPR with less numbers of nuclear weapons has been posing the difficult calculation over commitments, capabilities, and readiness of US nuclear posture in Asia. This agenda becomes more complicated since the nuclear dynamics in Asia is bound for rather deterioration. Facing with the increased number of missile capabilities of North Korea and the rapid military development of China, concept of deterrence response or the assurance in the alliance relations are continuously challenged by these developments, then it needs constant updating in order to meet this dynamic situation. And as we found that the key concept of the latest quadrennial defense review in February, the logic of the nuclear and conventional engagement in this region has to be tailored in new contexts. And I'm sure that this tailored regional approach is one of the leading concepts for the US to envision its overseas engagement. And thus, it is, I think, very important for alliance relationship to make a constant assessment of this tailored approach, including the nuclear dimensions. In this regard, I'd like to make 3 points regarding my immediate response to the NPR. My first point is on the regional deterrence and the regional security architecture, which was mentioned in the NPR. NPR mentions that the regional architecture includes effective missile defense, counter WMD capabilities, and conventional power projection capabilities, and integrated command and control. It is noteworthy that NPR claims, as George mentioned, that the non-nuclear elements play a vital role for enhancing extended deterrence and reduce the regional scope of maintaining the non-strategic nuclear weapons. And as George kindly introduced, that there was a controversy over whether to retain the non-strategic nuclear weapons for the purpose of ensuring extended deterrence, and B-61 for Europe and TLAM-N in Asia. And it was mentioned in the US Congressional Task Force report, America's Strategic Posture, back in May last year, which stated that Japan recognized that TLAM-N constitutes the important footprint of the extended deterrence in Asia. And it was also reported in some media that some Japanese officials aggressively lobbied to express a concern over the retirement of the TLAM-N. Nevertheless, as a result, and as it was much expected, that the NPR declared to retire the TLAM-N. And the decision of the retirement was quite understandable, given that the nuclear Tomahawk has been in storage since the Navy completed the withdrawal in early 1990s. Indeed, there has been a certain amount of concern in Japanese policy community that the retirement itself symbolizes that reducing visibility and the signaling of US nuclear commitments in Asia. But as written in NPR, TLAM-N was one of the numbers of means of forward deployed nuclear weapons in the crisis. So the other means include forward deployed bombers and dual capable fighters. And it is important to underscore that the NPR explicitly mentioned that the role of TLAM-N can be adequately substituted by some other means, including bombers, fighters, and other strategic weapons as well. In the narrow scope of how it could be substituted, I think it is maybe important for the US-Japan alliance to ensure the flexible deployment of the nuclear-capable bombers in East Asia, most likely in Guam. And NPR has retained the nuclear-capable bombers B-52H and B-2 as a part of nuclear triad. And as it mentioned, heavy bombers can visibly forward deployed for signaling purposes for the US commitment in the crisis. In the more broader scope, under the regional tailored approach, The efforts to ensure the extended deterrence are reflected not just in the NPR, also in the QDR and BMDR as a package. And so that the decision taking in these three reports reflect the desire to increase the reliance on non-nuclear means. In this regard, I think it is important to underscore that QDR mentioned that US will actually develop more and adapt for the presence to reassure allies of the US commitment in their security, so that US-Japan conventional capability enough to have a situational dominance against possible North Korean aggression and maintain the bilateral conventional balance of power against China is, I think, the very important structure for the extended deterrence after the NPR. My second point is on the nuclear doctrine. It has also much has been debated about whether NPR would limit the purpose of using nuclear weapons by introducing either non-first use, core deterrence, or sole purpose. I believe that Japan, against the expectation of many arms controllers, but Japan highly appreciate that the NPR did not adopt a universal policy that sole purpose of U.S. nuclear weapon is to deter nuclear attack on the United States and its allies. And given that North Korea's potential capability to attack Japan especially by chemical and biological weapons, it is, I think, still crucial for Japan to recognize that the U.S. reserved the right, that the nuclear weapons plays a role in deterring CBW attack. And even though there is much debate that the conventional forces can replace the role of nuclear weapons in both in peacetime and during the crisis, I think that the nuclear extended deterrence still plays important role for simplifying Pyongyang's calculations over their strategic value of possessing nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. And also, it is received positively in Japanese policy community, that U.S. NSA, negative security assurance, will be provided to non-nuclear weapon states that are party to NPR in compliance with the non-proliferation obligations, in hoping for further reinforcing effect on the denuclearization efforts on the six-party talks. And my final point is on China. China actually poses the question of extended deterrence much more complicated and dynamic than on North Korea. It is dynamic because the future nuclear and conventional strategic relations between US and China is a decisive factor for the Japanese defense planning for the coming age. In the NPR, the key word for describing China is ensuring strategic stability. And it is still unclear to me what the exact meaning of strategic stability is in this document. It is also a bit surprising to see that Russia and China are categorized in parallel in the same manner for the objective of maintaining this strategic stability. And Chinese nuclear arsenals remains much smaller than the arsenals of Russia. But given that the strategic importance of China for the United States and Japan, and at the same time its lack of transparency regarding its nuclear development programs, it is, I think, important to note that the NPR places more emphasis on the stability side questions regarding China. However, the scope of crafting this stability with China remain very, very vague in the NPR. The report only mentions that U.S. will pursue high-level dialogue with China, but the purpose of the dialogue on the strategic stability is to provide the venue and mechanism for each side to communicate its views about other strategy, policies, and programs on nuclear weapons and other strategic capabilities. So that the remaining question for U.S.-Japan extended deterrence is what is actually the future nuclear relationship between United States and China will be. And China has been working hard to ensure the deterrence against the United States in a more credible sense, under which we believe the basic doctrine of minimum deterrence. However, as far as I'm concerned, that I think that in the coming years that there will be a slight change between the nuclear relationship between the United States and China because of two reasons. Number one is, of course, we're going to have more advanced missile defense, both on the U.S. National Missile Defense and also for the advanced missile defense, which will be deployed in Japanese upgrade SM-3 and so on. That may change somewhat the deterrence calculus for the part of China. And also from Chinese side, although their development of the ICBM has been moderate, as the number of CSS-4 remain in 2,000 for the last 10 years, they are seemingly developing highly modernized strategic forces such as land bases, DF-31A, and also DF-21 and submarine-based JL-2. So that I think it is, for my final remarks, that the perception of the future U.S.-China relation, Japan may want enduring U.S. dominance over the Chinese nuclear capability. At the level of such dominance would not encourage China to seek for the regional theater dominance on the nuclear capability. But if in the future U.S. seeks to shift towards the mutual balance with China, some may concern that there will be the classic case of the detachment, where the US and French or British have debated very heavily during the Cold War, would also apply to the US-Japan security relationship in the future. But at the same time, for the other side of the coin, if getting into the US-China mutual balance ensure more stable strategic balance, and also kept the additional development of ICBM and MRBM on the China side, and finally encourage China to be engaged in the multilateral nuclear arms control talks, I think Japan may benefit more than simply against having such strategic relationship between U.S. and China. So these logic, if these logic should be materialized, I think it should be pursued in the trilateral manner among U.S., China, and Japan. Thus, it will be important that Japan join the U.S.-China dialogue on strategic nuclear weapons when such kind of arrangement could be made. I think I will finish my remarks here.
Thank you, Ken. Ken, that was a really great start. Thank you. It was very, very rich, and so I think there's going to be a lot to discuss. Lukasz, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there, and I hope that you can hear me all.
We can hear you, I think, very well. So why don't you go ahead and launch?
Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks, George, for the very kind introduction and for the invitation. I believe that invitation, there was something about me being the voice of the region, but I never thought that you meant it really as only a voice. My presence is there. I hope you put some nice picture of me around. But now to the business itself. As I structured my presentation, I would start with some general remark on the NPR and then on the regional issues and end up with something that it's particularly interesting in the context of this week and of the Tallinn meeting of the NATO foreign ministers, which is the issue of the U.S. strategic nuclear weapons in Europe. So to start with, are we happy with the NPR? I think the first piece of good news is that the NPR has been released after a delay which caused quite damaging speculation about the internal rifts on the scope and pace of change of the U.S. nuclear policy. The final document is a product of compromise, as confirmed by the voices of criticism both from the arms control crowd and from the conservative part of the U.S. strategic community. But, and here's the second piece of good news, I think it managed to convey the message that something has changed in the way the United States thinks about its nuclear strategy without appearing too idealistic. Thirdly, it's a very good starting point to try to reach good deals within NATO on NATO's new strategy concept, and hopefully also with the Russians, including the areas that are particularly interesting for NATO. That's for me, that's for us, but probably you should also ask the Germans what they think about the NPR, especially the part on the U.S. nuclear weapons in Europe. I would say that the focus on nuclear terrorism and proliferation concerns was noted in the region, but also the idea that certain other parts of the documents, for example, Russia, China, hedging, uploading potential alert postures, they look very much as business as usual. I think the biggest problem in my region and beyond, you might actually have with the people who have not read the nuclear posture review, and which are worried that the U.S. is very much on the slippery slope of disarmament and subscribing to global zero rhetoric, which would make it much less credible when it would need to use the language of deterrence in time of crisis. To put it frankly, the worry for the people that haven't read it or have just read the headlines is that the United States would not have the guts to take action when faced with determined necessary. But coming to I think the most important message for us and the most important message in the context of discussion, the commitment of the United States to NATO and to other regional arrangements. Quite strong language, and the parts devoted to this regional security arrangement, to the role which the U.S. nuclear weapons may play in the regional contingencies, I think very accurately describe the diminishing role of nuclear weapons in most of the scenarios and the need to provide assurances through a very comprehensive U.S. engagement. So the goal of reassurance to be obtained not only through military means, but through using a full range of hard power, soft power tools available to the U.S. government. Of course, still the focus should be on the political military core of our partnership. I think the goal of strengthening regional security architecture is one that the allies in Central Europe would take very seriously, and they will expect the administration to follow on and to implement the program which is put in the document. We in the region, of course, we also have a homework to do, especially regarding the defense budget. If we cannot spend more, we should at least spend smarter. If some countries are advocating a new focus on Article 5 on deterrence and reassurance, limiting our defense budget is not the best way to prove our point. This aspect of burden sharing within the regional arrangement was not too visible in the report, but I'm quite sure that Secretary Gates would not let us in NATO forget about the defense budget. But talking about more in practice, about next stages, about putting in practice general goal of strengthening regional security architecture. There is quite little about nuclear weapons in there. We are talking about political dimension and about military dimension, to be quite simplistic. In the political dimension, it's of course about joint understanding of threats and the challenges. But our Central European context, I would say it's about keeping the allies in the information loop, about consultations, about information sharing. Recent bad example to this, it was the April 2009 decision on the reconfiguration of missile defense, when, as I understand, most of the officials in the region learned about it from the journalists who called them to ask for their opinion. Good example of information sharing, keeping the allies in, would be the President Obama's meeting with the leaders of Central and Eastern Europe in Prague post-START treaty. In the military dimension, some ideas which I just that would be defense planning and security assessment at NATO. There are some problems. Nobody wants to admit really why about having all sorts of contingencies and potential threats included in the defense planning at NATO. The planners should prepare for all kinds of contingencies. They should work in secret, which means that they should not worry about being politically correct or incorrect. So if we are talking about defense planning at NATO, not avoid the word Iran, but we should not also not avoid the word Russia. Another issue, missile defense. Here, as regards Europe, the decision on the phased adaptive approach actually doesn't mean that everything is solved and we will be living happily ever after. Important decisions are ahead of us. How does NATO fit this architecture? How does Russia fit into this new? How to find the solutions which would fit our ambitions, which would give us credible capabilities, and would provide some level of protection to territories. On deployments in Central Europe, forward deployments of NATO and US forces, I'd say there are no hopes for another Ramstein base or Aviano, but we should avoid using the arguments which I sometimes heard in the NATO context, that we are too close to Russia to be considered fit for some of the investment and for some of the infrastructure which NATO plans to put on it. Of course, we also have the bilateral agreements with the US, and coming quite shortly would be deployment of a Patriot missile battery. Point exercises, the last point here, making sure that the deployment within NATO territory are easier for us than doing deployments out of area. We should learn how to deploy our troops to Kenya because we know perfectly how to deploy them to. The problem, which I mentioned before, the problem with making extended deterrence more credible to us is that lots of things which are done to reassure NATO allies could be seen by Russia as provocative and as suspicious. Doing it, we risk strengthening the groups within Russia, within the Russian military, within the Russian strategic community, which are quite paranoid about NATO and its plans towards Russia. Here we should be listening to these voices, but frankly speaking, what some people in Russia consider as their legitimate concerns not appear quite legitimate. For example, the idea of Central European members of NATO as a sort of aircraft carrier or a launching pad. Shouldn't be taking this kind of argument face value, so there is quite a delicate balance to be drawn between reassurance and engagement with. And the final part, the South strategy. Here it's quite amazing how many reports, articles, op-eds we had on this. Disarmers, which follow
Lukasz, can you hear me?
President Obama, and they campaigned for the removal of the U.S. nuclear weapons in Europe. Germany emerged as the most vocal representative of this group, first asking for removal of weapons from Germany, but then apparently changing its mind and saying that it wants to remove all US weapons from Europe as such. We also had this letter of 5, which was mentioned, even though it didn't directly call for withdrawal. On the other side, we are supposed there are these Cold War warriors of Central and Eastern Europe, including Poland, and possibly backed by Turkey, quite stubbornly believe that these weapons somehow could be used if they get into troubles with Russia. However, upon closer inspection, I would say the picture is much more complicated on this side of the table. Those people who think that the withdrawal is some form of betrayal of Atlantic cohesion, those people are very much a minority. For sure. At the same time, and this I would say would be the Polish reaction to the quite hasty decision. Also for keeping an eye on the development in the Middle East, but also on making a very serious attempt to engage. Exactly discussing how we could Russia in a step-by-step approach to eliminate tactical nuclear weapons. When we look at the NPR says that all options are open as nuclear weapons in Europe. But I think the NPR is clear enough where it stands. By highlighting the political value of the weapons, which, and here I quote, contribute to alliance cohesion, by mentioning the unique sharing arrangement, the NPR seems to signal that the time is simply not ripe for any far-reaching decisions on and by declaring all options open, the US, in fact, for this German-led charge
Hey, Lukasz, can you hear me?
of the NPR is that of an administration which would be quite satisfied with basing the big B-61 bombs on the US soil, while retaining the capability to forward deploy them in Europe. However, since it is difficult to achieve, others expect the US to follow a middle path. Personally, I regret that the United States did not spell out openly its preferences, but I understand that the basic need is to find a solution which would be acceptable to all the allies, avoid unilateral withdrawal, start serious discussions about the way to engage.
Lukasz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
I hope you heard me.
Well, most of the time, but not all the time. So I don't know if you know if you're moving or what happens, but it cuts in and out sometimes. So I'm hoping when we do the discussion, you will be asked questions that will have you say the parts that we missed. But go ahead. But try to. I can't picture the scene there, but try to be still. I think because I think they say movement kind of ends up distorting it.
So, I think in that I don't know how much you missed. So let's put it like this: that my expectations for the next steps would be that we start to Russians, but at the same time, we wouldn't move towards unilateral withdrawal, and that's the main conclusion I get from the nuclear posture review, part of the sub-strategic nuclear weapons scheme.
Okay, thank you, Lukasz, and then I'm sure we'll come back with on especially the tactical nuclear weapon issue that you were closing on. Let me turn now finally to Aring to give us a sense from Norway.
Sure. Thank you, George. It's okay if I stay here. It's probably easier to. I see there's still many smiling, beaming arms control faces out in the audience. That's very encouraging after a full day of discussion. And thank you also, George, for inviting me. It's an honor to be here and this panel as around the world, even in remote Norway, we've heard about you. So let me just say a few words about let's call it Norwegian perspective on the issue of extended deterrence. I should start by I'll just do a few words on sort of what the setting is and a little bit about what's a possible sort of way forward or a process and get into what could be practical steps, I think, that could be pursued in order to reduce the importance of tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, which is a goal at least from Norway's side. But I should start mentioning, since NPR is part of the topic, that from the Norwegian side we're very encouraged by the efforts, the signals and the efforts that we've seen in the last year from the US side. I think words are very important when it comes to disarmament and arms control. And there's been a very conscious push that we see on a lot of different issues from the US side that we hope also will set a good stage, or part of the stage for the NPT conference review conference next month. It's something that we welcome, and I think it's important that all these different steps, bilateral negotiations with Russia, the nuclear summit last week or a few days ago, they all illustrate that this administration buys into, if you will, the three pillars of NPT and the interlinkages between them. And I think that is very important in itself. On our side, from Norway, we try to do what we can as a smaller country, particularly in a multilateral context. We pride ourselves with having equally good context in the NAM group as we do with nuclear states, and try to help move things along when there are negotiations. When it comes to, since that is a question sort of in the title, when it comes to the NPR, we certainly welcome many of the signals there. I think there are many positive steps, and we will do our share to try to help the international scene on the international scene. But I should also mention that I think many international actors probably see most of the tricky issues, or at least equal amount of tricky issues, will be in the domestic scene in the U.S. as it will be in a wider multilateral context, related to issues that needs to be presented in Congress and some of the dynamics in an election year and so on. Anyway, tactical nuclear weapons. What is stated in the NPR is that this is an issue to be dealt with in concert by allies. And although the next step will be to discuss this within the context of the so-called strategic concept for NATO, which will go on now over the summer and into the fall up to the Lisbon summit. It will probably not be solved in this process, but what I think many countries are expecting is that there will be sort of a kickoff at the the meeting in Lisbon. The process to revise NATO's strategic concept should include a reconsideration, rather, of the alliance deterrence doctrine. The idea of the image of deterrence and what constitutes a threat is, of course, a key issue when discussing tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. And we need to ask some very fundamental questions in this regard. One is what possible contribution to security can these weapons really make? What security considerations are now being outdated by the globalization of interests, to use such a term, and by the development of political norms of more cooperative patterns? How can we see security gaps where nuclear deterrence is still considered to be warranted? How can they be filled by other means, since the use of nuclear weapons would obviously be utterly devastating? The issue of tactical nuclear weapons in Europe also has to be seen in the context of conventional capacities, and any reductions should be structured in such a way that they maintain the collective defense purpose in a credible manner for NATO. The reduction of and elimination of tactical nuclear weapons has not yet been the subject of any legally binding international agreement. The goal of a world without nuclear weapons obviously cannot be met without addressing this challenge. Substantial arsenals of tactical nuclear weapons remain non-transparent. That's another problem, as there is a lack of information about their location, operational status, and level of security. They are also believed to be more prone to proliferation and unauthorized use than strategic nuclear weapons. Moreover, the tactical nuclear weapons may continue to play an important role in the military doctrines of certain states. So the elimination of the danger posed by the continued presence of numerous tactical weapons, nuclear weapons in Europe, should be achieved by including them in a broader nuclear and arms control framework. This process should be subject to consultations among allied countries and be based on the principle of indivisibility of security and consideration of the strategic environment. And I guess we should also, as the previous speaker mentioned, dare to use the term Russia, and that Russia has to be an important element and partner in such discussions. As you know, there are many different views within the NATO alliance on the issue of tactical nuclear weapons, and that was also alluded to by the previous speaker in between. So many would take the perspective that this is an issue that cannot be solved, and I guess many would use the explanations when it comes to the NPR that it was conveniently put on the shelf because there's only downside for the U.S. to bring this issue to the fore if it states a clear preference to reduce the importance of tactical nuclear weapons. Many states that feel that this is the glue connecting them in an Article 5 setting to the U.S. would feel offended, or at least work against it. And otherwise, if they took an opposite view, well, then you would have other countries feeling that the Prague speech did not get a proper follow-up. So there's only a downside, really, for the U.S. to be the country pushing this issue in NATO, if you will. However, Norway, we believe that there is room to agree on some fairly practical, simple steps. And again, this is it's easy. Many issues that are problematic at the normative level, you can sometimes get a bit further if you just simply focus on practical steps and to move things on the ground, if you will. And I think this is well illustrated in a non-paper that was issued quite recently between Poland's foreign minister and our own foreign minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, just a couple of weeks ago, a non-paper to be presented in NATO, building on the initiative that was mentioned earlier, the Norwegian-German initiative, and also then the 5-country initiative, to discuss the issue of tactical nuclear weapons more openly and in the alliance. And this non-paper draws up a couple of ideas that are such practical steps. And I think it's significant, not only because it's practical steps, but it's significant because because Norway and Poland would have quite different points of departure within the alliance when it comes to this issue. And so it's significant that these two countries have agreed on plan, if you will, or way, sketch of how we can move forward. So I'll just mention a couple of these steps that I mentioned in that non-paper. One is it's sort of a 3-step logic to it. One is related to information sharing as a first step. Another second step would be confidence building measures, and then first would be sort of practical steps to reduce and eventually eliminate tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. A couple of information sharing or transparency issues would be the US and Russia should be encouraged to reaffirm their mutual commitments, such as the 1991 and 1992 initiative to reduce tactical nuclear weapons. The US and Russia should provide official information about progress on eliminating tactical nuclear weapons following previous unilateral declarations. And a third point, the US and Russia should declare the numbers of tactical weapons. Also be information sharing or transparency step. And these declarations should be announced in the framework of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review process or in the United Nations General Assembly. Step 2 would be confidence-building measures. The confidence-building process should build on information exchange between the US and Russia on the number, location, and operational status of warheads. Such exchange could take place within the NATO-Russia Council. Experience may be drawn from the NATO-Russia Permanent Joint Council, which was used before 1999 as a forum to exchange information on the implementation of presidential commitments. I won't go into all of these, but basically this gives you a little bit of flair of that two countries with quite different points of departure can agree on some ways that you can move things forward within NATO. As practical steps towards reducing the role of tactical nuclear weapons. And a final point I'd like to make, I'm sort of overstaying a little bit my time here, and I know we're the last panel as well. We consider the renewed focus on armament control as a boost that we hope will carry over to the NPT review conference, as I mentioned initially. And the recently issued nuclear posture review also sent several positive signals. I mentioned that initially, but I think I could be a little bit more specific. We consider the NPR as being a way to implement Article 6 and not least the 13 practical steps from the 2000 review conference. The NPR may thus be considered as a reaffirmation of the US in achieving the NPT objective of a world free of nuclear weapons. We welcome the emphasis on continued reductions in the nuclear arsenal, the clear statement of not developing new types of nuclear weapons, the signals to pursue ratification of CTBT, and most importantly, through its new declaratory policy that's been mentioned so many times today, such as the negative security assurances. And again, we welcome all those elements in the NPR. We think they move things in a positive way. Now it's left to see how these steps can be implemented. That's the proof of the pudding. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Odin. Let's turn it to a discussion, and then I think because we have people remotely, when you when I call on you and you say who you are, then kind of say loudly and clearly to whom you're addressing the question, so we cue our friends into this. We'll start with Andrew, and then we'll go to Dr. Yao, and then Admiral McFadden.
Andrew Pierre, Georgetown University. I will address this question to both Odd Ingvalheim, if I pronounce that correctly, and to our friend in Poland, Lusas Kalusa. Deterrence. Deterrence is a concept which basically I think we would all agree is in the minds of men and has to be in the minds of men to make any sense. Now, I spent quite a bit of time in Europe. When I go to ministries of defense and foreign affairs, they've heard of vaguely of U.S. tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, forward deployed planes, and so on. But the public's, my sense of the public's, is that they don't really have much perception, which now, with now perhaps an exception in Germany, because it's sort of been given this prominence. So I'd be interested in either of you two gentlemen whom I address, getting from you a sense of whether I'm wrong, and whether there is a kind of a public perception of deterrence and tactical nuclear weapons contributing to that, and if one day they were eliminated by some connivement of bureaucrats in various capitals, whether anybody would really miss them in any significant way. It's another way of asking how real an issue is this when you get beyond the military to bureaucracies.
Lukasz, did you hear that?
How serious is the issue of your entire withdrawal in Europe? Is that correct?
In reality, as opposed to with government officials that specialize in this stuff.
Okay, sure. Shall I start?
Go ahead, and because I think we heard it more clear. I just want go. Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay, so as I mentioned, it was quite remarkable how much this issue is right now in the spotlight. As it was mentioned in the question, it was an issue for a bunch of bureaucrats, military people, plus the think tankers, maybe some peace movement people also taking attention. But right now, especially also in Belgium, the issue is in the public domain. So people would be waiting for answers. They would be holding, especially in Germany, they would be holding their government accountable on the promise which was included coalition agreement. So this issue would not fade away. In other countries, also in my region, still the issue of the strategic community context of the overall relevance of Article 5 and the issue of whether United States or not is weakening the transatlantic. Very rarely it is seen as an issue in itself. It's mostly connected to a larger question of whether NATO should be more a crisis management organization or more of defense transatlantic. I hope you could hear it.
Most of it, but I think one of the key things that you said, I just want to confirm, was that basically rarely is the issue of tactical nuclear weapons or nuclear policy seen as an issue of itself, but rather it's part of a broader set of concerns.
That's exactly the point which I was making.
I've always had an affinity for the Poles. Odding.
No, I can just a little bit along the same lines. I think that threat perception is a very key issue here, and that's what I alluded to when I mentioned. So we have to pose some critical questions about what is really tactical nuclear weapons supposed to solve or help us with. And these threat perceptions are very different among various European countries. And I hope I'm not being too sort of obvious in that, but a lot related to, of course, historical experience. Norway was during the Second World War liberated by Russia, which in an orderly fashion afterwards withdrew to its original borders. That's of course a very different experience from Luka's country, who many would say was portrayed by many European countries around in the beginning of the Second World War and then after under the Russian or Soviet influence. So this is I think this is where the word strategic patience enters, George. That will take maybe a generation for a more common European perspective to sort of evolve. And meanwhile, we just have to work on discussing what really is the real deterrent. Well, what is the real threat that we're facing, and just at the same time be willing to accept that tactical nuclear weapons in Europe is a lot about the symbolic aspects of it and what it signifies for many countries than sort of a real deterrence as military deterrence. So.
Thank you. That was very well put. Thank you. Dr. Yao.
Thank you. I'm Yao Yunzhu, Dr. Yao Yunzhu from Beijing, China. And my question is to Professor Jimbo. And thank you for staying up so late, but you don't look tired. According to China's no first use policy, if Japan remains a non-nuclear weapon state, China would not, in any circumstances, use nuclear weapons against Japan. So what kind of nuclear threats do you see from China against Japan? Because you really mentioned China as even a more important factor for to justify the extended deterrence plus DPRK, but you think compared with DPRK, China is a more important factor for a nuclear component in the extended deterrence from the United States. So what's your idea for the nuclear component in the extended deterrence to work against China? Is it for deterring China from taking aggressive actions in disputed island or in disputed EEZ demarcation line, or should it be used to stop China from seeking regional dominance in a more general sense? I just can't see how can a nuclear extended deterrence work in these circumstances.
George, can I respond to that?
Please, Ken. I can't see you, but I'm glad you could hear it, so that's great. Yeah, please do.
Okay, thank you very much for your excellent questions. I recognize, of course, that the China maintains the policy of non-first use and also the negative security assurance towards the non-nuclear nations, and also that the Chinese nuclear development has been against that the many realistic expectations that remain in a very moderate number, especially with regard to the ICBMs. And you can see that the Chinese nuclear posture itself has not been in the dramatic leap forward with regard vis-a-vis United States and also within the region. But we can see a lot of variations in the future course of how the nuclear weapons plays in the strategic context in East Asia. And I think the first layer is the what kind of, as I mentioned in my remark, that what kind of nuclear relationship that the United States and China is going to have. And currently, that China claims that it is the minimum deterrence. Maybe not enough, but maybe some credible number could possibly attack the United States mainland or the forward deployed forces in order to deter the nuclear attack or some other conventional attack against China. But in that regard, there are several variation of scenarios we can think about the future course of such kind of relationship. What if China will have more sophisticated striking capability, not only towards the United States mainland, but also with the forward deployed forces, Japan, India, and some other neighboring states. China can actually logically diversify its nuclear strategy to apply that the security strategy of like escalation ladder or also the means of negotiation. And that could be the thing we have to think about in the future. And also with regard to the more like specific cases, if China engaged the war in Taiwan or engage in several like more limited military conflict with the neighboring states, I do not think that the nuclear escalation itself is an automatically supposed scenario. But also when it comes to the 1996 lessons that some of the PLA officers still try to link that kind of linkage towards the regional contingency could expand it towards the nuclear exchange in a theoretical terms. So we are living in such kind of deterrence is a very theoretical kind of notion, and that kind of notion could be pretty much changed by the term of the capability and also the intention of the Chinese forces itself. So that there are so many, I think, the variation that the Japanese strategic thinker may raise such kind of concerns.
Ellen McFadden, and then Dr. It's interesting, so we can come back and forth, but go ahead, Ellen.
Eric McVaden, the Institute for Foreign Policy Analysis. I'd like to address my question to Professor Kinbaugh as well. I wonder when we talk about lack of transparency, whether we truly mean that or whether we don't believe what we hear from the Chinese. I find myself at odds with Secretary Gates on that, for example. Not that it worries Secretary Gates very much, I suspect, but what I mean is I've been working China as best I could for a while now, and I truly understand China's, or at least have an appreciation for the number of nuclear weapons that China has with respect to its strategic forces, the 20 or 24 Dongfeng 5 alphas, and the fact that it's going to develop as many Dongfeng 31 alphas as it needs to be able to overwhelm our ballistic missile defense. We get told that very clearly. We get told many other things about what China is going to do with respect to being able to cope with the Taiwan contingency and so forth. In other words, a lot of this is very clear. We may not like what we hear, but it seems to me that maybe there is more transparency than we give them credit for. And some of it, of course, comes through intelligence sources, but it's widely known. So I think we have a good view of what China is doing. And there's one more point to make. China at least tells us that they are not aggressive and that they're not going to move against their neighbors and so forth. Whether we believe them or not, we at least have to say they say it, and then they say it very candidly. So I would appreciate Professor Jinbaugh's comments on that.
Well, thank you. But basically, I agree, fully agree with what the assessment of the Chinese nuclear forces and the current status of how China perceives its forces by themselves. But I firmly believe that there is no such kind of formal arrangement between the United States and China about how to treat the future nuclear weapons in China. Basically, that the strategic stability that has been mentioned in NPR is very much a kind of the diplomatic concept. And when it comes to the kind of future development of when the China tried to pursue a more credible minimum deterrence against the United States, there would be the case that there should be some kind of understanding between U.S. and China to how to maintain its stability. And in that sense, we need a more like a clear kind of information about what kind of force posture we are talking about, and what kind of doctrine that the Chinese can match its force posture, and the prospect of arms control, multilateral arms control dialogue, whether China can involve in such kind of setting would be another question. In that all regard, I think we absolutely need more, I think, clearer intelligence and information, both from Chinese official and also from other sources as well.
Thank you, Ken. Other questions? Yes, Yusuf, and then Pierce. Yeah.
Yusuf Butt, Harvard University. This is a question mainly aimed at the European contingent, but also like to hear the Japanese view. It's regarding missile defense, and I'm trying to understand the enthusiasm for the Europeans agreeing to the missile defense plans. We have NATO plans to build up a shield over 100% of Europe by about 2015. And I'm trying to understand if they really perceive the threat from Iran, or where is the threat that this is a solution to, number one. And number two, if the threat is real or perceived to be real, do the Europeans and the Japanese realize that since the missile defense will be imperfect, even a future system that's better than the current ones, it'll still be imperfect. So as long as there's a credible threat of even one nuclear weapon making it through, you really haven't neutralized the threat. So it's not, I don't understand the threat, and I wonder if the Europeans and Japanese realize that it won't really address the threat, even if it's real.
Comments? Lukasz, did you hear it?
Yes, I heard loud and clear. I hope that you hear me now better.
Yeah, we do hear you better. So why don't you go ahead, and then Ding, and then go ahead.
Okay, what kind of threats? During the Bush administration, it was one of the main point of criticism towards the then concept of missile defense, that the threat perception is and the threat assessment is quite fuzzy. So what the Obama approach was supposed to change, that we are supposed to concentrate on the threats that are already there or would most probably soon be there, and this is Iran, writes quite clearly. And as these phases were launched, it was quite visible that you start from the Middle East, you start from Southern Europe, which already is in the range of Shahab-3 missile, approximately 2,000 kilometers range. So this is not a threat which is invented. The question is for next stages in the new plan, especially the phase 3 and phase 4, which are supposed to deal with mid-range and long-range missiles. Here, as we understand, the development of the system would be dependent on the situation, on the security situation. First and foremost, the situation in Iran and around the Iranian nuclear program. If we don't have extended range of Iranian missiles, of course, then someone quite justifiably could ask the question, why are we putting the elements of missile defense in Northern Europe? But as for now, this is just a plan which we agreed to, but we understand that this is very much dependent on the developments. The second question, whether we know that you cannot rely on missile defense. I think we know. We learned the hard way by observing the tests of the system during the Bush administration, and by observing the Israeli attempts to create an MD system. The Israelis also had some failed tests. So the issue is whether you would like to have additional layer of protection, something which would go together with diplomacy and together with deterrence, and how much are you willing to pay for it? These are the questions to be asked.
Very much along the same line as Lukáš. I think the fundamental thing is that many European countries or allies think that the new system, the so-called phased adaptive approach, is closer to what we would consider a real threat, namely Iran, or so-called, what's the new word for rogue states? Rogue states, there's a new one, but
I'm glad there's a new. I don't know what it is, but I never liked the old one, so I hope
it's related to NPR. Just it's too bad I forgot about it. Something like that, yeah. Anyway, but in that it starts with the first steps is related to short range and middle range, systems. This is where we start today, and rather than sort of more the systems that were previously discussed that were more, I think, strategic ballistic systems. But and another aspect is that this will be embedded in the alliance. And it is a stepwise approach. So the next steps will be related to other parts, other regions than Europe. But I think it's important to put missile defense in its right context. It's far from a system that solves all issues, and most issues are only solvable politically. And but this system comes a lot more close to the threat as perceived by European countries than the previous one did.
Ken, let me ask you to comment on that, because Japan obviously has spent a lot of money and effort in joint missile defense work, theater missile defense work with the U.S. and and North Korea has tested missiles provocatively over and around Japan. So what answer that question in a sense of Japan's perceptions and security interests.
Sure. I think for the case of Japan, that the threat perception towards the North Korean missile with a nuclear capability becoming more real after the series of nuclear tests and missile tests by North Korea since 2006. And we believe that the North Korea has installed more than 200 nodal missile that is operational within the range of whole territory of Japan. In such kind of circumstances, I think the role that the missile defense play for the Japanese defense has become much important to create the kind of pillar for the tool for the denial deterrence against the North Korean. And we are having already installed the layered system composed of the PAC-3 for the ground base and also for the SM-3 on the Aegis base. And it is also important that we are going to upgrade by joint US-Japan joint research on the missile defense, and that the later upgrade advanced version of SM-3 will be able to intercept more precisely. And also it is important that we can intercept the missile, not only Nodon, but maybe Tepodon and further. And so that the mission for the Japanese missile defense is not only defending our territory, but also maybe defending others, including U.S. forces and maybe in the future U.S. mainland, which the missile that could target Alaska or else. So that for as a previous speaker mentioned, that it has become a very important kind of tool for the deepening of our alliance relationship. In order to intercept the missiles, we have to collaborate in many sense by sensors and tracking, and also for all the joint operation could be made, so that the missile defense has become a very important like a tool for the enhancing the joint operation with the alliance relationship as well, and that also enhances our like day-to-day military to military credibleness between two forces.
Thank you, Ken. Other question, Pierce. Thanks, Katie, and then the gentleman back there, Nima. Thanks.
Pierce Corden from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. This is a question for our two European presenters. You sketched out a three-step logic for proceeding, although I guess it doesn't have a specific timeline, but the suggestion is that it might take longer than a year or so. But at the same time, if I understand things correctly, Germany has made a decision to acquire the Eurofighter, which would not be nuclear capable. So I guess my question has to do with whether that fact, as sort of a fact in being, may impact on your proposal, or whether you would see distinctions between American aircraft carrying nuclear weapons potentially that are in Europe and dual purpose or dual key aircraft in the possession of allies. Are there differences there that impact both on the timing of decisions and your logic?
But Auding, go ahead and go first.
Sure. Yeah.
Great.
Let me repeat that. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, because I'm not quite sure how Germany's choice then to have such an aircraft would influence interoperability and sort of the doctrine of the alliance as such. But I would presume that still you could go ahead with those practical steps in terms of reducing the amount and the importance of nuclear weapons in Europe. Not sure if that's.
Yeah. Lukas, do you have any thoughts on that question about the German decisions on which replacement aircraft to buy and whether they're dual capable or not?
First of all, about the timelines. As far as I know, this Polish-Norwegian initiative does not contain any timelines, and of course, it's quite an ambitious program, which would take far longer than a year to accomplish. So obviously, the question how to maintain not only stationing of the weapons but also the delivery vehicles would become an increasingly important one. We know it's confirmed in the nuclear posture review that F-35 Joint Strike Fighter would be certified for nuclear missions. So we have continuity on the U.S. side. In Europe, Italy and the Netherlands, two of the current DCA countries, they also opted for F-35, and it remains to be seen whether they would like to have a nuclear certified aircraft. As regards the others, including the Germans, I'm afraid that the natural course of things would be that they would simply phase out their role as DCA countries. I don't expect that Germany would even ask for Eurofighters to be certified for nuclear role, taking into account the fact that they are opposed to the very idea of nuclear sharing under the present government coalition.
Thank you, Lukasz. And then last question, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, my question is directed to Łukasz. My name is Andrew Reedy. I'm a student at George Washington University. Dobry wieczór, Łukasz. And my question concerns threat perception and missile defense. Prominent Eastern and Central European intellectuals published an open letter, just about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, directed to President Obama. And one of the things mentioned, highlighted in the letter, was the desire to not have Russia too deeply involved in missile defense, as it would compromise U.S. credibility in that region. And my question reflects that letter and the perceptions of Central and Eastern European NATO allies, and how accurately those statements reflect the consensus, or was that a marginal group, I guess. However, it was signed by several former presidents and prominent intellectuals. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. The letter, well, it's of course it was prepared and signed by so many eminent personalities that it's not easy to criticize it, but I will criticize it nevertheless. Mainly because I think it went a little bit too far on the alarmist side. I think it took a number of our concerns, quite legitimate concerns, and then put the volume up on this. There was a part saying that U.S. decision on missile defense would be for us a test of a U.S. engagement to the region, and of course, taken the developments, you would need to say that the test was failed. So I would say that the terms of the letter were put too harsh, possibly because some of these people knew how the things work in Washington, and they know that it's best to scream really loud, and then someone would listen to you. So they screamed, and all of a sudden there was an interest in what Central Europe thinks and does. So they succeeded. But I wouldn't say that even now it would be an anathema for us to involve Russia in a missile defense system. The problem would be rather practical, how to do it, how to integrate these systems, and to agree actually what are we defending and what are we defending against. Between NATO and Russia.
Great. Thank you, Lukasz. I want to, one idea on this panel, and then I want to thank our speakers and others. But I mean, it seems like this discussion just kind of reaffirms the way in which the extended deterrence issue, and there again, I mean both conventional and nuclear, is so difficult to pin down in terms of what we're talking about that is a concrete threat and a concrete real problem, and what are concrete mechanical ways to deal with them, and then how much of it is symbolic and political and psychological in all of these different directions. And so it makes it fascinating as an analyst to work on, and I think also then very, very challenging for policymakers to work on, because you can provide a material answer to what is a non-material problem, or vice versa. And so actually getting the mismatch, whether it's missile defense or tactical weapons, are they relevant anyway, and who's the enemy, and what's the threat, and what's the problem, is very, very difficult to pin down. But it is an issue that's clearly with us, and I think it really is going to be important for a while. So I want to thank each of our panelists. You made great contributions and sacrifices staying awake. I hope you don't have to go to work in the morning, especially you, Ken, or else just stay up. But I really do want to thank you for your great contributions, and I want to thank Jim and Shayla and Katie on our team for making this all work so well. And I want to thank all of you finally for attending. It was a very, very good day. So thank you very much.